Women like you don't come in here to buy that dress. You come in here to take pictures next to it.
Women like you don't come in here to buy that dress. You come in here to take pictures next to it. You'll never wear this dress. The words landed in the middle of the boutique like a slap, sharp enough that two other customers turned to look. Raven Johnson didn't flinch. She kept her hand resting lightly on the beaded bodice of the gown displayed on the mannequin, the one she'd been admiring for the last 10 minutes, the one with the hand-stitched lace sleeves that caught the light every time she moved. "Excuse me," Raven said, her voice calm, almost pleasant. The kind of calm that made people nervous if they were paying attention. The boutique manager, a thin woman with a tight dark bun and a name tag that read Hannah, didn't back down. She'd already helped 3 other women that afternoon, women who'd walked in after Raven and her younger sister Sophia, women who fit a certain picture in her head of who belonged in a store where dresses started at $2,000. Raven and Sophia had been standing by the same rack for 15 minutes, ignored, while Hannah fawned over customers with less money and more melanin-matching assumptions in her mind. "I said what I said." Hannah crossed her arms. "This is a custom piece. It's not for browsing." Sophia stepped closer to her sister, her jaw tight. "We're not browsing. She wants to buy it." Hannah's laugh was short and ugly. "Sure she does." Raven looked at her for a long moment. She thought about the years she'd spent building her business from nothing, the contracts she'd signed, the late nights, the sacrifices, the way she'd put her own dreams on a shelf for years so Sophia could finish school without worrying about rent. She thought about every door that had been slammed shut in her face long before she had the money to pry it back open. And she thought about how little this woman in front of her actually knew about her, and how much she'd decided anyway. She didn't yell. She unzipped her purse, calmly, deliberately, and zipped it right back up. "Keep the dress," Raven said. "My money spends beautifully elsewhere." She turned, took Sophia's hand, and walked out without looking back. Behind her, she heard Hannah mutter something to one of her colleagues, something dismissive, something meant to make her feel small on her way out the door. It didn't work. Raven's spine stayed straight the entire walk to the car. What neither of them knew was that a man sitting in the boutique's private VIP lounge had seen the entire exchange through the glass partition. Kong Tae-jun had been reviewing the store's financial documents for the better part of an hour, debating whether the asking price for the franchise location was worth what his people wanted to use it for. He'd been hesitating. Numbers on paper rarely moved him one way or another. Then he watched a woman get humiliated in the middle of a boutique and walk out with more dignity than anyone in the building had a right to. He didn't hesitate anymore. Tae-jun stood, buttoned his jacket, and made a single phone call. "Buy it," he said into the phone. "All of it. Today. I don't care what they're asking." He hung up before the person on the other end could ask a single question. When Hannah came back from celebrating her small cruelty with a complimentary espresso, she found a different man waiting for her near the register, flanked by 2 associates in dark suits who hadn't been in the store 30 seconds ago. "I just bought this location," Tae-jun said, his voice quiet in a way that somehow filled the entire room. "Cash. Effective immediately. You work for me now, or you don't work here at all." Hannah's face went pale. Sir, I don't understand." The dress that woman was just looking at, Tae-jun continued, nodding toward the mannequin. "Put it in the vault. If anyone else so much as touches it, you're finished. Do you understand me?" She nodded quickly, too stunned to form words. Tae-jun didn't wait for a verbal answer. He was already walking toward the door, his eyes following the direction Raven had gone, though she was long out of sight by then. And, just like that, the woman who'd been told she'd never wear that dress walked out of the boutique without realizing that someone had been watching her the entire time. Someone who recognized her. Someone who had never forgotten her. Subscribe and stay with me, because this story is only getting started. 3 days later, Raven was in line at her favorite coffee shop, the one 2 blocks from her office, running through her schedule in her head, a client call at 11, a contract review at 2. Dinner with Sophia that night to celebrate her sister finishing her last final of the semester. She didn't notice the tall man behind her until the barista called out her order wrong, and he gently corrected it. "It's oat milk, not almond," he said. She said it twice. Raven turned, startled, and found herself looking at a man with sharp eyes and an unreadable calm to his face. "Do I know you?" "Not yet." He smiled, polite, easy. "Tae-jun." "Raven." She studied him for a second, trying to place him, coming up empty. There was something familiar in the way he held himself, but she couldn't pin down where she might have seen him before. Well, thank you for the oat milk intervention. Anytime. She expected that to be the end of it. It wasn't. He showed up again 2 days later at the bookstore near her apartment, holding a battered paperback and somehow already knowing she liked the same obscure poetry collection she'd been hunting for months. He showed up at the farmer's market on Saturday, helping her carry a bag of vegetables to her car without being asked, vanishing again before she could thank him properly. Each time felt like coincidence. Each time felt a little less like coincidence than the last. What unsettled her more than his presence was how attentive he was, not in a way that felt intrusive, but in a way that felt like he already knew her. He mentioned her favorite comfort food, a specific noodle dish from a hole-in-the-wall spot 3 neighborhoods over, before she'd ever told him what she liked to eat. "How did you know I liked that place?" she asked one evening, when he'd shown up with takeout from that exact restaurant, like it was nothing. "Lucky guess," he said, but something flickered behind his eyes when he said it. Something that wasn't quite a lie, but wasn't the whole truth either. She let it go. For now. The more time she spent with him, the more she noticed things that didn't add up to lucky guesses. He knew which streets to avoid during rush hour without ever being told. He tipped waitstaff like someone who'd once needed that money to survive. He had calluses on his hands that didn't match the tailored suits he wore. One evening, while he was waiting for her in her apartment, she came out of the kitchen and found him standing in front of an old photograph she kept on her bookshelf, a faded picture of the late-night diner she'd worked at years ago. Back when she was barely scraping by, back before her business existed as anything but a dream scrawled in a notebook. He was staring at it like it had reached into his chest and pulled something out. "You okay?" she asked. He turned, and for a second, his expression wasn't the calm, composed mask he usually wore. It was something rawer. Something that looked almost like grief mixed with awe. "I'm fine," he said, recovering quickly. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how far you've come." He set the photograph down gently, like it was something precious. "That diner. Did you work there long?" 3 years, Raven said. "Worst hours of my life. Best lessons of my life." She studied him. "Why does that matter to you?" "It doesn't," he said, too fast. "Just curious." She didn't believe him. But she also didn't push. Not yet. Sophia noticed the change in her sister before Raven was willing to admit there was one. "You're different when you talk about him," Sophia said one night, the two of them curled up on Raven's couch with takeout containers between them. "You get this look." "What look?" "Like you're scared to want something." Sophia set her chopsticks down. "You know what's funny? You've spent years taking care of everybody else, putting yourself last. He looks at you like you're finally somebody's first choice." Raven opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. Because Sophia wasn't wrong, and that was the part that scared her most. She'd spent so long being the strong one, the responsible one, the one who held the family together while she put her own wants on a shelf so high she'd half forgotten they existed. Taejun didn't ask her to be strong around him. He just looked at her like she already was, and like that was enough. "It's not that simple," Raven said quietly. "Why not?" "Because I don't know who he actually is, Sophia. He shows up everywhere. He knows things he shouldn't know. He's hiding something." She rubbed her temple. "And I like him anyway. That's the part that scares me." Sophia reached over and squeezed her hand. "Then find out. You're not the type of woman who waits around wondering. You go get answers." Raven managed a small smile. "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from the best." Sophia nudged her sister's shoulder. "Watching you sacrifice everything for me for years taught me a few things." The boutique manager Hannah hadn't taken her demotion well. Stripped of her authority, but kept on staff under the new ownership's strange mercy, she spent her days fuming, watching the new owner's name pop up in hushed conversations among the staff. Nobody would tell her directly who Kang Taejun really was, but the whispers were enough to send her digging. It didn't take long. A few late nights on a work laptop she had no business using, a few backdoor searches into files she'd stumbled onto while doing inventory for the new ownership transition. And Hannah found threads connecting Taejun's name to underworld dealings that made her blood run cold. And buried in those same files, a name she recognized: Raven Johnson, the woman she'd humiliated, the woman this terrifying man had apparently bought an entire boutique for. Hannah didn't think about consequences. She thought about money. A private investigator had approached staff before, fishing for boutique gossip about wealthy clients, offering cash for anything interesting. This felt like the jackpot. She sold what she found: Taejun's name, his background, his connection to Raven, thinking it was nothing more than juicy tabloid material that would never see daylight beyond some gossip blog. She had no idea the investigator she sold it to was working for Taejun's rivals. It happened on a Tuesday evening. Raven was driving home from a late client meeting, her phone buzzing with a text from Sophia asking what time she'd be home, when a black SUV cut across 2 lanes and forced her car toward the curb. Before she could process what was happening, 2 men were already out of the vehicle, moving toward her car door. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone, but before she could dial anyone, headlights flooded the street behind her. Taejun's security detail arrived like they'd been tracking her location the entire time, which, she'd later learn, they had been, ever since the threat against her had crossed his radar an hour earlier. The men retreated as fast as they'd appeared, peeling off into traffic before anyone could stop them. Raven sat in her car, hands gripping the wheel, heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Taejun arrived 15 minutes later, and the moment he stepped out of his car and saw her standing on the sidewalk, shaken but unharmed, something in his controlled expression cracked completely. "Are you hurt?" His hands hovered near her shoulders like he was afraid to touch her and afraid not to. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice wavered. "Taejun, what is going on? Who were those men? Why was someone trying to grab me off the street?" He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, his jaw tight, his eyes searching her face for any sign of injury he might have missed. "Taejun." Her voice hardened. "Tell me the truth. Right now." He exhaled slowly. "When my men told me your car was missing, I couldn't breathe for 10 seconds. His voice trembled in a way she'd never heard from him. "I can handle any threat in this world, Raven. I've handled worse than this more times than I can count. But I can't handle losing you." "Losing me to what?" she demanded. "What world are you talking about?" "I'm not just a businessman," he admitted, the words coming slow, deliberate, like each one cost him something. "I run an organization. The kind of organization that makes enemies. Dangerous enemies. Someone leaked information about you, about us, and it reached people who want to hurt me by hurting you." Raven's mind raced, piecing together the fragments she'd been collecting for weeks: his unexplained knowledge, his security detail, the careful way he moved through the world like every room held a threat he was already calculating. "You're in the Mafia." "Yes." She stepped back, putting space between them, her chest tight. "And you didn't think that was something I deserved to know before someone tried to drag me into a van?" "I was trying to protect you from it," he said. "I was trying to give you a normal life for as long as I could. I don't need protecting from the truth, Taejun. I need you to respect me enough to give it to me." Her voice cracked, just slightly, the first sign of real vulnerability she'd let through all night. "I've spent my whole life being underestimated by people who decided who I was before they knew me. I won't let you do the same thing, even if you're doing it because you care." He nodded slowly, something like respect blooming behind the worry in his eyes. "You're right. I'm sorry. I need time," she said. "I need to think." He didn't argue. He let her go, watching her walk to her door, every instinct in his body screaming to follow her and make sure she was safe, forcing himself to stay rooted to the spot instead. She'd asked for space. He would give her that, even if it cost him. Hannah was summoned back to the boutique 2 days later, told only that the new ownership wanted to speak with her about her future with the company. She arrived hopeful, foolishly hopeful, thinking maybe her old position was about to be reinstated. Instead, she found Taejun standing in the center of the showroom, flanked by 2 of his associates, his expression colder than she'd ever seen it. "Do you know what you did?" he asked, his voice deceptively quiet. "I don't know what you're talking about," Hannah said, though her voice already betrayed her. "You sold information about my private life to a man working for people who want me dead," Taejun said. "That information led directly to an attempt on Raven Johnson's life 3 nights ago. The same woman you humiliated in this very room weeks ago." Hannah's face drained of color. "I didn't know." "You didn't ask," he cut her off. "You saw an opportunity to make money off someone else's life, the same way you saw an opportunity to make Raven feel small because of how she looked walking through your door. You've made a habit of deciding who deserves dignity and who doesn't. That habit just nearly got someone killed. Please, Hannah said, her voice shaking now. I'll fix it. I'll do anything. You can't fix this, Taejun said. Your accounts have already been frozen pending a corporate lawsuit for data theft and breach of confidentiality. Every luxury retailer in this city, and several beyond it, have already been notified of your conduct. You will not work in this industry again. You can't do that. I already have. He took a step closer, his voice dropping lower, each word deliberate. You spent your life deciding who belonged in certain rooms. Now you'll discover what it's like when every door is closed. Hannah had nothing left to say. She was escorted out by the same associates who'd flanked Taejun, her career and her cruelty finally catching up to her at the same time. Raven spent 2 days turning everything over in her mind, the danger, the lies by omission, the way her heart still ached to see him despite everything. She thought about Sophia's words from weeks earlier, about how Taejun looked at her like she was finally somebody's first choice. She thought about every choice that had brought her to this point, the choice to walk out of that boutique with her dignity intact, the choice to keep spending time with a man who clearly carried more weight than he let on, the choice to demand honesty instead of comfortable lies. She decided she wasn't done choosing yet. She called him on the 3rd day. I want the rest of the truth, she said. All of it. No more half answers. He met her that evening, and this time, he didn't hold anything back. 5 years ago, he began, his voice steady despite the vulnerability underneath it. I was running from a rival gang who'd ambushed my convoy. I was shot, bleeding out, barely conscious, and I stumbled into the alley behind a diner because it was the only place with a light still on. Raven's breath caught. She knew that diner. She knew that alley. A woman found me, Taejun continued. She didn't call the police because she could see I wasn't going to survive the wait, and she didn't ask questions because she could see I didn't have answers to give. She dragged me inside, patched up the wound herself with whatever she had in the back kitchen, fed me, and let me sleep in the storage room until I could walk again. She never asked who I was. She never asked what kind of trouble I was in. She just saved my life and asked for nothing in return. Tears were already gathering in Raven's eyes, the memory rushing back to her in pieces, the stranger she'd found bleeding in the alley behind the diner all those years ago, the one she'd patched up out of instinct more than anything else, the one who'd disappeared before sunrise without a word. That was you, she whispered. That was me. His voice broke slightly. For 5 years, I never forgot the woman who saved my life and never even asked my name. When I saw you in that boutique, getting humiliated by someone who couldn't see an ounce of who you really are, I recognized you instantly. I bought that location in less time than it takes most people to order coffee, because some part of me had been waiting 5 years for the chance to give something back to you. Raven pressed her hand to her mouth, the pieces of the mystery finally clicking into place, the way he knew her favorite food, the way he'd stared at that old photograph like it held the answer to a question he'd been carrying for years. The way he looked at her like he was constantly grateful she existed. This whole time, she said softly, you weren't chasing some stranger. You were trying to find your way back to me. I never stopped trying, he said. Not once. Not for 5 years. The weight of it settled over her, not as pressure, but as something close to peace. This wasn't a billionaire's whim. This wasn't a powerful man deciding to collect a beautiful woman like a prize. This was a debt of gratitude that had quietly become something far deeper, carried in silence for half a decade until fate put them back in the same room. I'm still angry you didn't tell me everything sooner, Raven said. I know, but I understand why you were afraid to. She reached for his hand. I choose to stay. Not because of the dress, not because of the money, not because of any of it. Because you've been honest with me now, and because some part of me has been waiting just as long to find out who you really were. He pulled her into him, holding her like he'd spent 5 years afraid he'd never get the chance. He took her back to the boutique a week later. The space had been completely transformed, soft gold lighting, fresh floral arrangements, a staff that greeted her with warmth instead of suspicion. The new manager, handpicked by Taejun himself, led Raven to a private fitting room where the original dress waited for her, pressed and gleaming, exactly as it had been the day Hannah decided she wasn't worthy of trying it on. Raven stepped into the dress slowly, feeling the weight of the lace settle against her skin, feeling something inside her chest settle along with it. This wasn't for a wedding. It wasn't for Taejun. It wasn't even for revenge, not really. It was for herself. She stepped out in front of the mirror, studied her reflection for a long moment, and let herself feel every bit of pride she'd swallowed weeks ago when a stranger decided she didn't belong in this room. Turns out she was wrong, Raven said quietly, to no one but her own reflection. Taejun stepped up behind her, his hands settling gently on her shoulders, his eyes meeting hers in the mirror. She was wrong about a lot of things, he said. I didn't buy this to prove you could afford the dress. I knew you could. I bought it because nobody gets to decide what you're worthy of. Raven turned in his arms, resting her forehead against his chest, finally letting herself feel the full weight of everything they'd survived to get to this moment. 6 months later, Raven walked through the boutique's front doors, the bell above the entrance chiming softly as the new staff turned to greet her with familiar, warm smiles. Good afternoon, Mrs. Kang. She smiled back, glowing in a way that had nothing to do with the lighting, a soft bundle cradled gently in her arms. Sophia trailed in beside her, scanning the racks for something appropriate for an upcoming christening, the same fierce protectiveness in her eyes that had once defended her sister against an entire room's worth of judgment. This one, Sophia said, holding up a delicate cream-colored outfit. Perfect for the baby. Perfect, Raven agreed, laughing softly as her son squirmed in her arms. She wandered past a mirror near the back of the boutique, catching her own reflection for a moment, then glanced toward the wall beside it, a beautifully framed photograph from her wedding day, capturing her radiant in the very gown she'd once been told she'd never wear. Taejun appeared behind her, wrapping his arms gently around her waist, resting his chin against her shoulder as he noticed where her eyes had landed. Still thinking about that dress? He murmured. Raven smiled, tilting her head back against him, completely at peace with everything that had brought them here. Not anymore. Good. He kissed her forehead softly, the warmth of the moment settling over both of them. Because it was never about the dress. Sophia glanced over from the rack of christening outfits, catching the quiet exchange, a knowing smile tugging at her lips as she watched her sister finally living the truth she'd spoken so many months ago, a woman who'd spent years putting everyone else first. Finally standing in the center of her own story, finally somebody's first choice. The bell above the door chimed again as new customers walked in, and the staff greeted them all the same way, with warmth, with respect, with the simple decency that should have always been the standard. Raven adjusted her son in her arms, took her sister's hand, and walked further into the boutique that had once tried to shut her out, now simply another room in a life she'd built on her own terms, surrounded by the people who'd never once doubted what she was worth. For years, Raven had been the one making sacrifices, carrying burdens, and putting everyone else first. She thought the greatest victory would be proving she could buy the dress. She was wrong. The greatest victory was discovering that her worth had never been tied to a dress, a price tag, or anyone else's opinion. It was being loved by someone who saw her value long before she ever had to prove it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more unforgettable Korean mafia romance stories. And remember, never let anyone else decide what you're worthy of. I'll see you in the next story.